Should Taiwan have a territorial defense force? Well, today I speak with a military expert at George Mason University, Michael Hunzeker, who recently wrote an article in War on the Rocks called The View of Ukraine from Taiwan, Get Real About Territorial Defense. Well, Michael, a lot of people are actually talking about your article and thinking about, what kind of defense Taiwan should build, especially among its civilian population. Tell us why you think Taiwan should have a territorial defense force.
Well, thanks so much for having me and giving me the chance to talk a little bit about the argument that we lay out in our piece. And I think at its essence, we argue that territorial defense is an appropriate strategy or idea for Taiwan for a couple of reasons. The first is that we think it is the strongest possible symbol and signal that the Taiwanese people are willing, ready, and able to provide for their own defense, to fight for their homes and their communities, and that by sending this signal, you can actually increase the deterrence ability of the country in order to signal to any potential adversaries that it's just not worth the fight. And the second piece is that even if an adversary, an enemy, an opponent were to decide to want to attack Taiwan, the fact is that in order to achieve the political goal of actually subduing and occupying the island would require pacifying and controlling the people. And a territorial defense force makes this extremely difficult to do, and therefore buys time both for Taiwan to defend itself, but also for the United States and other allies and partners in the region to intervene and help Taiwan.
I've actually spoken to a lot of people who would love to be trained to be able to defend themselves, their families, their neighborhoods. What kind of training do you think we would need? Like, what are the basic things we need to learn, and how long would that training have to be for us to be ready?
Well, as a former American Marine, I have to say you can never have enough time to train, and the trick to it is to convince yourself you are never ready. But I think this is one of the reasons that Admiral Lee and I suggest that, and again, there are many ways to do territorial defense. I'm not suggesting our blueprint is the right answer. We want to move in that direction. But that our argument or our idea is that you should build these forces around existing special operations units and personnel, or either those on active duty or those who have recently retired or left the military. Because these types of warriors have a lot of training in conducting independent, autonomous, small unit hit and run ambushes. And in our estimation, this is kind of the ideal thing that Taiwanese territorial defenses should do. And that a territorial defense force, if properly trained in hit and run guerrilla tactics, that these would be especially effective, not during the initial combat phase, but assuming an invasion force can break through Taiwan's frontline active duty defenses and its reserve defenses, and they start to make their way into the city, that then you can see these territorial defense units starting to wage an insurgency, a guerrilla war, hitting not the frontline units, but rather the support units, the logistics units, the police units. And I think that's more likely to succeed and impose the types of costs on an invasion force that would, again, hopefully make them think twice before taking that first step.
So how many people do you think would need to join for this to be enough? Or,
well, and here is, I think, here's a reason for optimism is our popular conception of guerrilla wars and insurgencies is that it takes thousands upon thousands and thousands of people. And although I think there's still a scholarly debate out there, it seems that you can start a movement like this and really kind of fan the flames of popular resistance with just a few hundred or a few thousand well-trained warriors. But I don't think that the bar is as high as people necessarily think. I don't think the cost is as high. I think if the will is there, we can recruit a few hundred, a few thousand people to really get this program running. I think other Taiwanese kind of waiting on the sidelines will see this really does work. That's serious training, and I'm having a meaningful role to play. And watching what's happening in Ukraine and seeing that this can actually be effective, I think this thing could grow quite quickly, again, in a way that just helps us avoid these worst case scenarios.
So if there was an invasion and there was urban warfare, I mean, what do you imagine that to be like? And do you think that Taiwan could win still, even if it got to that point?
I think, and this is an important piece of the argument, and we should be transparent and honest about it. The logic of territorial defense is the logic of guerrilla warfare, and for Taiwan, the logic of guerrilla warfare in cities, mega cities like Taipei. And we should make no mistake about it. It would be horrific and it would be costly. And I think we're seeing some of that play out in Ukraine. And so against a determined invader, I believe the Taiwanese Territorial Defense Force, if married up with a holistic asymmetric defense posture, could really delay an invader, make it very difficult, make it very costly, and critically buy time for the United States and other coalition forces to intervene and help out. I think the training has to start now. This idea that the people will just spontaneously on their own stand up with whatever weapons they have on hand, and I've been to Taipei, they don't have many weapons on hand, and go up against hardened combat units, I think is a bridge too far. And I think psychologically, there will be that moment of shock and terror. I remember going into combat for the first time in 2003 in Iraq, and it is a mentally shocking moment in a person's life. And realistic, rigorous training, if you do it as much as you possibly can, it helps prepare you both as an individual, but also as a unit and as a society to absorb that initial blow, get over that initial shock, and then take the fight to the enemy.
Have you had any responses from Taiwan's military or government to your article? Is that confidential? No. I mean, I have not. I'm a college professor. I'm an academic who studies these things and believes that they're very important, and I've been writing, as much as I can to try to help steer the debate in the way that I see. But no, I have not heard any feedback. My hope is that silence suggests that people are taking it seriously, probably better than criticism, and that, maybe this idea will get a little bit of momentum and we'll see some movement. Could it happen on a grassroots level with just private citizens organizing groups? But I think they would need ammunition, right? I mean, that's illegal.
I think this is a really important point. And this is where I would caution that Ukraine reminds us of a very important difference between Taiwan and Ukraine. And that is, Ukraine is a massive country that has land borders on all sides, which makes it relatively easy to resupply ammunition. Taiwan won't be in that position. It's an island. I think most analysts who have studied Taiwan's specific strategic challenges know that China will do everything it can to both cut Taiwan off from the outside world and do what it can to deter the United States, Japan, and others from potentially intervening, which means for some amount of time, Taiwan needs to be ready to go it alone, and therefore it needs to have as large a stockpile of fuel, energy, ammunition, food, water, and all of these things, both for the civilian population, but also especially for a territorial defense force. And so this idea that grassroots organizations are going to have a lot of any of these sorts of things, if there isn't a top-down leadership and preparation and stockpiling, I don't think that that's likely.
Do you think that the U.S. would come and help us if we were in a war?
I think it is safe to assume the United States will not sit on the sideline, and we can rest assured. And this is one of the reasons I do advocate for territorial defense. I don't think that there's just a military logic, but I think there's a powerful political logic. And to the degree, because here in the United States, we're having our own debates about America's role in the future, not just of Taiwan, but the wider world. And I think that when the American people see the Taiwanese people willing to sacrifice their time and their energy to participate in these types of collective defense initiatives, that's going to send a powerful signal. And it's going to be hard for the American people to ignore that, especially in a moment of crisis. And it's going to make it easier to galvanize American support, which will be a critical ingredient to kind of nudge an administration into action.
I mean, for the average American or the American public, do they understand how important Taiwan is to the world?
Maybe a couple of years ago, I would have answered probably not. But I think the American people are quite savvy. I think we're paying attention to what's happening in the world around us. It's almost impossible to ignore it. And the war in Ukraine, although it obviously immediately garnered a lot of attention, it almost as quickly raised this issue about Taiwan and what the United States would or would not do in Taiwan. And I know my Facebook feed and my social media feed are full of people, friends and colleagues who don't study the things I study, who are asking, what does this mean for Taiwan? What's our role in Taiwan? And again, this attention, this conversation, it's been paid for at a really high price. And I would hate for us to lose the momentum that we could otherwise gain from it.